Ladies and gentlemen, 2024 Lotus Emira. This is the first edition 2.0. And the first edition, they had the 1.0 and the 2.0. The 2.0 was essentially a second first edition release that gave you additional color options, including this Atlantis blue. Prior to that, they only had Seneca blue, which is the hero color. And there's also Meridian blue, which is even darker than this. I also optioned this out with the diamond cut wheels, very polarizing. You can also get the same wheels in either silver or black. And sport suspension, which gives us these Michelin Cup 2 tires. We have 245 section width in the front and 295 in the rear. Sport versus Tour, I did a comparison video in the past, but that was not on canyon roads, that was on street roads. But you could immediately tell a difference in the front end responsiveness. So I think if you're a driving enthusiast, you probably want the sport suspension, and if you want a car that's more comfortable and you know, you like the way the car looks and you want just a cool sports car to go from A to B, then Tour is going to be more comfortable for you. Love the way this thing looks. I still walk into my garage, I'm like, god damn, I can't believe this thing is mine. 6-speed manual transmission, the V6, you can get also the inline-4 with the DCT, you can get the V6 with an auto or a manual. Of course, with a car like this, please, please, please get it with a manual. The 6-speed, the ASIN slush box that goes with the Toyota Supercharged V6 is not really doing this experience justice, in my opinion. It's the Toyota 2GR FE supercharged engine. It's got an Edelbrock supercharger on it, making 400 horsepower, 310 pound-feet of torque, which sounds good and all, but there are some issues with it, which we'll talk about shortly. Over the last few months, I finally hit break-in. That took me 4 months, which is a bit embarrassing to say. The other cars I've owned in the past, FRS GR86, were all a month or less. But here, you know, with traveling to Japan and traveling elsewhere and getting sick twice with the flu, it just took me a bit longer than expected. So yesterday, we did the oil change. It's a headache because you got to take off the aero panel on the bottom there, which is, I think it's like 30 bolts or something. Takes a while, but got the oil change. We're a little bit over 1,000 miles now, and we can finally send it. Some updates since last time. We got the full car PPF'd. They did a fantastic job with the PPF. Craftsman, I went over there, hung out a bit, asked them a lot of questions. I learned a lot of things, and just the attention to detail and the thoroughness and the overall final product, I am very happy with. So if you want your Emira, or any other car really, PPF'd, then I highly recommend them. Now, the reason I went full rather than just frontal is because I'm going to be doing a lot of track work, and I guess I could have just done front in like some of the high impact areas for the track work, but I'm planning on keeping this car for a long time, and I just wanted the peace of mind. So, with that being said, let's get inside. We're testing out these Witta mats right now. They're sending me a new set because these are fitting okay, but there's like a few issues here and there. And also trying to get these to sit down, which I think you'll need double-sided tape. But anyways, the mats the car comes with, they don't cover much at all, which bothers me and a lot of other owners on the Emira forums. So here, this is a better solution, but it's not fully hashed out. So I'm working with them, giving them, you know, some like rough measurements or changes to make to try to get it dialed in. Compared to just about any other Lotus, this is barely recognizable, right? I mean, they say this is all new, but most of us see this as essentially Evora 2.0, and Lotus will tell you, you know, the chassis has been updated, but it's very, very similar. Similar weight, right around 3,100 pounds, which by Lotus standards is heavy, right? Those who love the Elise and the Exige and cars like that. I mean, this is 50% heavier than those, but you still get a lot of Lotus feel in this car. The interior overall, I think it's now found a beautiful balance of being very livable, very modern, very aesthetic, and it doesn't feel like you're compromising. In the Evora, you have the Alpine unit, and it looks like it's built in a backyard. And now it looks at least like it's built in a nice backyard. The fit and finish, the quality here it's not Porsche level, okay? So if you want a really nice car that's gonna take you from point A to point B in comfort and is reliable and has amazing build quality and is a car first rather than an experience, get the Porsche. If you want the experience, if you are a driving enthusiast, if you love the feel of a car, the way it communicates with you, if you want an occasion every time you drive, then that's what you're gonna get here. And even with the interior, right? I mean, you got the exposed shifter linkages here. The manual transmission, we'll get to how that feels. The start-stop, a lot of people think this is kind of cheesy or corny and silly. I fucking love this, man. It is just adding to the occasion. It is, some people are like, oh, you gotta, it goes down, so you gotta lift it. Dude, one finger up and you press, right? Or however, whichever fingers you want, or you can even do that, whatever you want to do. We have a nice high resolution, good contrast ratio screen right here for the infotainment. The dash is all digital and based on the modes you go to. That's Tour. Here in Sport, it changes just the colors, and then Track changes the layout as well. In Track, you also have these 2 information clusters right there, so you can customize what those are. For me, it's gonna be tire pressures, of course, and on the right side, you would just quickly swap to whatever you need. But the issues here, when you're driving, these aren't just buttons, they're also swipeable. And you can, just based on your movements, you can accidentally change that, which is a little bit annoying. I think just regular buttons would have been fine. Don't know why they had to add that. Also, there's no oil temperature, which I think is a huge oversight for a car that they say, hey, yeah, you know, get the sport suspension if you want to take it to the track. I do want to take it to the track, but without oil temp, that's somewhat of an oversight. So many of the details here, from the way that the interior is designed to even just the driving experience, it feels very bespoke. You can tell this is a lower production car that isn't as perfected and clinical and refined as something like a Porsche Cayman. I'm actually gonna start this in Tour first rather than Track. And I think that's part of the charm, is that you have this very special feeling vehicle. Now in Tour mode, we have the exhaust valves closed, and the throttle response is a lot lazier. So this is when you're just kind of driving around town and not really pushing the car too hard. You can still heel toe it just fine. I do most of my driving actually in sport mode, which is gonna give that more immediate, sportier throttle response, and also open up the exhaust a bit, give it a nicer sound. I still think it's a bit too quiet for my taste. So I'm still an old man, so I don't want it super loud. I'm probably just gonna do a third cat delete. And that alone, I've seen online, really transforms the sound. But even still, you have a special experience stock. You have the supercharger whine, and you can see that supercharger bypass valve in your rear view. You can see that moving throughout the video as we drive this. Now here on these rougher roads, Sport is definitely not going to be as comfortable as Tour, but I think the trade-off you get with like the front end response, the overall sharpness of the driving dynamics, I think is worth it. Again, if you're the driving enthusiast, I think Sport is the way to go. Because even Sport, it's not harsh. Compared to other cars I've driven, other sports cars, it's not harsh at all. Lotus has always been known to do suspension and chassis tuning right, and this car is no exception. Steering wheel has this nice thickness to it. I love that. It's a little bit chunky. The squared off design, you get used to. I personally would prefer something a little bit more classic, a circle. Like, I think Porsche's current gen steering wheels are the gold standard to me. I would have loved something like that, but the way this thing feels is fine, and I haven't quite gotten this sideways enough yet where I need to be, you know, going all over the wheel to counter steer. So we'll see how the squared off shape affects that. But if you're driving 9 and 3 as you should, then probably not much of an issue. The manual transmission is both requiring a lot of effort and delicate at the same time. Meaning that it's a little bit finicky. It's a little bit, there may be times when you need a double clutch, like especially going from, so I'm in third, going into second, I find it so much easier to double clutch that smoothly than just go, you know, going straight down with a normal rev match. Actually, let's push this first and I'll tell you more about that after. love this car. Oh, so good, man, so good. All right, so quickly back to the transmission. It's a little bit finicky. It has a mind of its own. There are times when you need to be a little bit more intentional with it. It's higher effort. It is mechanical and notchy, but it's very much a close sibling to that Evora transmission. If you've driven a later year Evora, like an Evora GT, it's more similar than different to that. And that's not necessarily a problem. I don't think it's an amazing transmission, but you do need to get used to it. There's a bit of a learning curve, and I'm happy to say that the throttle response, though, which was a huge issue from the Evora, has been largely resolved. I can now rev match in all modes, Tour, Sport, Track, without issue. It is consistent, whereas in the Evora, that was a huge issue. You could not get consistent rev match. Now, the steering. Back there, I'm pushing it, right? The steering has so much texture to the road. You can read every little crevice, but you don't get load up. If you brake, you get the front end really weighted up, and you turn, the steering is not heavier. My Mazda CX-50 has way better steering weight up mid-corner than my Lotus Emira, which is an insane statement to make, but it's true. I think that by adding caster here, that could help with that load up mid-corner. And I think a lot of people are really blown away by the steering because just driving it around, you get so much texture through that hydraulic power steering. Just about every other car you can buy new today is electric, and generally you get less feel through electric versus hydraulic power steering. The only other manufacturer making hydraulic would be McLaren, right? Obviously a much different price point. So while you get that great texture, the load up does bother me because the load up is what tells you how much grip you have to work with the front of the car. It tells you a little bit more of what's happening and then makes it more comfortable for you to push the car harder. So that is a trade-off. Chassis dynamics. When I drove that first Emira on the channel back in December 22, you can see that video right up here, that thing gave way to understeer really easily. And you have to keep in mind, the weight distribution of this car is 39% front, 61% rear, and the Cayman is 45 and 55 front to rear. They both have that tighter polar moment of inertia near the center because, again, both are mid-engined. But it's not just weight distribution, it's also the chassis tuning. And I wonder if because Lotus is going more mainstream with this car, much more so than any car before, that they wanted to make this more approachable, because understeer, of course, is a lot safer than oversteer. Now, as I've been driving this more and learning how to drive around that limitation, you can't just stomp on the throttle because as the front end gets light, yeah, it's gonna start pushing. Even, again, on that first ever video, there was like I think a long left-hander or something where I was pushing, I was like, wait, why is the front end starting to push a bit? This is just really strange, I'm not even pushing it that hard. And even in the last few weeks, around roundabouts, towards the exit, I'm getting on the throttle and boom, it's starting to push. Surprisingly so, even with these Cup 2s. And you have to just be more mindful of the weight balance with this car front to rear. And if you are more mindful, if you are more intentional with trail braking and more intentional with not just stopping on the throttle toward corner exit, then you can work around that. And in fact, you can then get the rear end to start rotating with you, which I love. However, some people aren't gonna like that. They aren't gonna like that you need to drive around that. And I still am gonna prefer a car that feels a bit more neutral, or at least less understeer prone than current. So I'm gonna get a more aggressive alignment probably after my first track day to see if we can dial that out a bit. Some other things you should know. The seating position and ergonomics, actually pretty good. As Colin Chapman famously said, the shifter should never be more than a hand's width away from the steering wheel. We're good there. If you're taller and have longer legs like me, the steering wheel does telescope far enough. I wish I could be just a little bit lower in terms of seating position. You are still pretty low. But I think the reason that I feel that way, and probably many others as well, is because the windshield here cuts off relatively low. And that makes you feel like you're higher up than you actually are. And I feel the same way in the Evora, even though you can be sitting pretty far down. So I think in reality, if I were to try to ignore that, you feel like you're in the right spot, But just because of this, the initial impression is, hey, you know, I wish I could sit like maybe half an inch lower. The pedals are shifted pretty far to the right. That's definitely going to be a bit of a learning curve for many people. Clutch feel isn't quite as natural and high resolution as something like a Porsche, even a Porsche Cayman, but not a problem by any means. You're not going to have issues when it comes to the transmission. You're not going to have issues with the clutch. It's going to be the shifter here having a mind of its own at times. Throttle response, especially in sport and track mode, feels very natural and consistent and what you would expect from a sports car like this. The brakes, I'm not sure if they're the same AP Racing brakes that they had in the Lotus Evora, because now they just say Lotus on the calipers rather than AP Racing like before, but they feel very similar. You have that more natural and progressive bite. It's not overly bitey at the beginning, which sometimes, I mean, I actually do enjoy the very aggressive at the beginning because that firmness and initial bite gives you some more confidence, but here it's a little bit more linear and natural, which is also good. Just depends on your preference and I guess what you're in the mood for. Man, that's one of the issues I have with the engine. The red line is at 6,800 RPM. And in the Evora GT, I think it was 7,000 or 72, something like that. I think the reason they cut it lower here is because of emissions. And I'm hoping with the tuner, we could easily just put it back to 7,000 or 72, whatever it was in the Evora. And it's like just as soon as it's getting good, it kills the fun. With that soft limiter, as you guys just saw back there doing that pull. I think that this tack takes a little bit getting used to. A more traditional analog tack is my preference, but we'll see how I feel about that on track. Speaking of which, we'll turn into track mode now. Now you can see a little bit clearer the tack. Again, double clutching that in a second. I mean, it sounds good though, right? Who would have thought a supercharged Toyota V6 can sound that good? And that's before a third cat delete. No issue with these rev matches. Dude, I just fucking love this car, man. It's not perfect, right? I think the engine is actually the greatest drawback to this. But I find myself getting used to it because when I say the engine is the biggest drawback, it's not the power, right? This thing has enough power, this thing has enough torque. It's actually very usable. It's a good spot where you're not, you know, you drive a car that has 700 horsepower and you can't even use it, you can't even push the car because it's just going to overwhelm the tires and you don't want to turn traction out because you're going to kill yourself. This is a car where you can push it, it's at that right level, but it's just the character of the engine cutting you off too soon. The sound is cool, the linear and progressive way it pushes, it feels like a naturally aspirated engine, but man, I just wish it had a few more revs. The steering weighting up, I am just a steering, I mean, one guy on the forums called me a steering fetishist, which I think is fucking hilarious, and also not false. So for me, it not loading up in the corners, it does bother me a little bit. But again, I'm hoping we can fix that with some alignment changes. And most people probably aren't going to give two flying fucks about that. But the way this car is just so connected, there's nothing else like this that you can buy today. It is truly such a pleasure, man. I used to idolize the Cayman GT4, and that was my attainable dream car ever since medical school. And when I was at the point of being able to buy one, the Emira got announced. And I was like, well, shit. I actually really like what Lotus is doing, and I've driven other Lotuses or Loti, and that driving signature, that focus on connectedness is more my speed. And then I drove a lot more Caymans, whether it's GTS 4.0 or the GT4. And while they are really competent and really capable, they're a bit clinical, they're a bit dull. And the GT4 of course comes alive on the track, but most of my driving is not on the track. For most of us, it's primarily probably 90+% on the streets. And this car just makes you feel so connected, from the brake feel to the steering to the highly mechanical shifter. Like, the Cayman shifter is not even as good as the 911 shifter, even in the GT4 and GTS 4.0. If you want to get a manual Cayman, like the shifter feel and the way that it like kind of tilts a lot, it just has a little bit of slop to it. It bothers me. If you want auto, I mean, go Porsche all the way, because the PDK there is amazing. And again, I haven't tried the DCT and the inline 4 for this car. Can't comment on that, but we all know the PDK in Porsches is gold standard. But every time you drive this, it is an occasion. And it's much more willing to dance with you underneath you, which is what you want as you push a car on the streets. Oh, front end was getting a little bit light there and pushing. Wow. Wow. I'm a fan, guys. I'm a fan. I just wish I had better roads here in Las Vegas, because, you know, that little twisty section back there it's not much, right? It's a bit of a tease. You go to California, there's roads galore. Now, the braking procedure was 1,000 miles, keeping it under 4,000 RPM. But from the Lotus engineers themselves, you want to keep it under 4,000 for the first 500 miles, right? And the same thing about, like, you know, not maintaining a certain speed on the highway, yada, all those best practices. Not pulling too hard, even under 4,000, and, you know, and so on and so forth. But after 500 miles, every 100 miles after that, you want to push. You want to do some moderate pulls, not continuously, because you need the engine to cool down and not have it as a sustained higher temperature. But you want to do that an additional 500 RPM every 100 miles. So at 600 miles, now you're pushing it to 4,500 RPM, and then at 700 miles, you're at 5,000, and so on and so forth. So it was a bit of a process, and who knows how important that actually is, given that this is a Toyota Supercharged V6 and it's going to be pretty reliable. But I'm of the mindset that just do it once, have the peace of mind, and do it right. Getting a bit of rotation. See, you load on the front and you get on the throttle, you can play with that weight balance and rotate it. But if weight's too far on the back and you get on the throttle, you're gonna feel a lot of understeer. I shouldn't say a lot of understeer. It's not like a 996 or 997 Porsche 911, but you will feel a bit of understeer, despite it having double wishbone in all 4 corners. And again, with double wishbone, you're getting a little bit more of that dynamic camber change as you load up the front suspension, which is going to be more, applicable, especially at turn in as you're loading up the front. But for those wondering, the Cayman, of course, is McPherson's strut in the front. Love how this car feels like it's on its toes. It wants to dance a little bit. Oh man, man. Pushing this car more now. It's not just confidence and speed. It's a dance. Like you can get the rear end to rotate with you a little bit. It's so communicative. The whole chassis, right? Again, Lotus is masters, complete masters when it comes to chassis tuning. And I guess that's why they went with these fixed dampers rather than having adaptive dampers, right? Getting the Sport or the Touring, to really be able to dial that in. And maybe at the price point they couldn't find adaptive dampers that gave them the level that they wanted. I don't know. I'm just, the more I drive this thing hard, the more I'm like, yes, keep this car long term. And I'm just eager to see how it performs on track. In the discussion of whether or not you should buy an Emira, the first question you need to ask yourself is, what kind of car enthusiast are you? And what do you want from that vehicle? I think most driving enthusiasts are gonna love this, hands down, no competition. And even at that price point, people are like, it's too expensive, $105,000, it should be $75,000. Shut the fuck up, dude. Everyone is always complaining by how expensive a car is. Everyone is always saying a car should be less expensive than it is. Who is ever saying, hey, yeah, that was a really fair price, that's fantastic, right? Based on the current market, based on what you can get with $100,000, how are you gonna tell me that this is not an amazing value at $105,000 for the fully loaded first edition 2.0, but if you want the regular V6 and you don't want all those options like the heated seats and whatever, then you can get that price point lower. This is, I would say, great value. You're getting a lot of car and a lot of experience for the money. A ton of experience for the money. Again, buying new. If you want to talk used, that's a whole different conversation and not really a relevant conversation, because this is a new car. You can't really buy one used that's 5 years old that has 20,000 miles on it. Cars like this give me hope for the future of driving enthusiasts, because we can find these cars that are connected and fun and analog and not just overly digital. You drive a modern BMW, it's gonna rip your face off with performance. Like that M3 and M4, holy shit. But I wanna feel something too, man. I don't wanna just go fast. As many of you guys know who've been following the channel, I'm also getting a Mazda Miata, which should be delivered in the next couple of weeks. Like, that's what I'm about. I'm about the driving experience. And the Miata's not perfect either. We'll talk about that separately and why I actually love the S2000 more, but I still with the Miata and yada. But if you're the kind of person that loves driving more so than just cars, you'll be really happy with a vehicle like the Lotus Emira. It does have faults. It's definitely not perfect. But for the driving enthusiast, it hits those priorities in all the right ways. And if you're not a driving enthusiast, no judgment, man. That's totally fine. But you're just not gonna like this car. You may love the way it looks, but you're not gonna love the interior. You're not gonna love the way it drives. You're better off getting the Cayman, or if you're in Europe, maybe an Alpine 110. I don't know. I haven't driven one. I've just seen a lot of reviews. I would love to drive one of those, because that is actually lightweight. And as Colin Chapman said, add lightness. I feel like this Lotus Emira is a bit chunky for for his tastes, I would assume. But for my taste and for your taste in the modern era, I think right around 3,000 pounds is the sweet spot. Because you don't feel like you're in a tin can. You don't feel like the weight is holding back the driving experience in the same way that it does when you start approaching 4,000 pounds, right? Anyway, my friends, as you can tell, I love this car a lot. In terms of other things I've done, we're getting the tint redone. Had some issues with the tint with like the edges and such, if I can show you right here. So getting that redone. A bit of haziness on the windshield as well. I go with VFO cameras. I've been using them since 2014, so about 10 years. And I actually have a rear one too, but since we're going to be redoing the tint, I haven't placed that, but he hardwired a rear one and a front one. I like VFO. This is the A229 Pro. I've tried a bunch of theirs. I like the Mini as well, but the Mini is only one channel, not two channel, and I wanted it two channel. So, in terms of exterior, a lot of people ask me, am I going to be changing the wheels? I'm actually really happy with the diamond cut wheels. Normally, I don't like diamond cut wheels, but the aesthetics here work for me. If I start tracking this more frequently, which I don't think is going to happen, I'll track it a couple times per year, but the Miata is mostly going to be my track toy. But if I were to track this more frequently, then I'd probably get a second set of wheels and do like, you know, some proper 200 treadwear track tire, like a Kuma V730, something like that. Exhaust, I think stock exhaust with the third cat delete is going to be my choice, but we'll see. We'll first try the third cat delete, see if it gives me the sound I want, and if not, then we can try changing out the exhaust. Other than that, I mean, it's beautiful stock. I don't feel the need to really change anything. Forgot to mention, we do have the full black pack, both lower and upper, which is I think is like $1,000 or $1,500 upcharge. Normally, your roof is going to be body colored, but I think it looks better in black. Yeah, guys, I mean, I love this car. I'm super grateful to be able to own this and to make videos for you. If you are in the Vegas area, I want to do a lot of comparisons. The Lotus Emira against the Lotus Evora, against the Porsche Cayman, the 911, etc., etc. So if you're in the area, if you want to film a comparison, reach out at jabalandcars.com. Fill out the form on the homepage. Much love, my friends, and I'll see you all in the next one.